Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. We got an exciting and fun webinar, something new for IHN that we're excited for. So tonight's webinar is going to be about nutritional therapy for fibromyalgia with Vanessa Peacock. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Madden. I'm the campus manager at IHN Vancouver, as well as program advisor for IHN Online Pacific. And yeah, like I said, we got a great webinar tonight, and so happy that all of you were able to join. So Vanessa has a bachelor's in science in nutritional medicine from Thames Valley University in London, England, and a master's in science in physical therapy from University of Alberta. Vanessa has 5 years of experience in private practice at a multidisciplinary pain clinic, specializing in chronic digestive illness and persistent pain, as well as 4 years experience as a chronic pain-focused physical therapist. She's currently practicing online while working on her PhD on topics pertaining to chronic pain rehabilitation. And she brings over 6 years of experience in the natural health products industry as a product specialist, both in retail and manufacturing level. She's taught various courses at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition in Vancouver since 2013, and currently shares her expertise during the Therapeutic Nutrition Supplementation and Practice Con Ed course, and a new Con Ed course that she has developed, Nutritional Therapy in Chronic Pain. So happy to have you here, Vanessa. I'll toss it over to you.
Awesome. No, thank you so much, Jason, for the introduction. So without further ado, I'll just start sharing my screen so that everybody can, we can dive right into the topic. And as far as Q&A is concerned, so I think Jason's going to moderate that. And if you have any questions, just type them in the chat, as we go along. And then at the end of the talk, we'll get to them and we'll go into a little bit more depth. So what I wanted to introduce everybody to today is nutritional therapy and chronic pain with a spotlight on fibromyalgia, because this is a very common chronic pain condition where there are really significant nutritional influences and a lot of things that people can do nutritionally to actually alleviate it. So we have a couple of contents. So we're going to talk first about actually just what is pain, because this is something that most people don't know, and that's absolutely fine. The scientific world has not known what pain was exactly until really the mid-90s. So it's not common knowledge how pain works, but what we do know definitively how it works now. So we have to kind of share that knowledge, because that informs why nutrition has the effects that it does, and also so that we can talk a little bit about other therapies that should also be used alongside of nutrition, so that you're aware of basically holistically how best to treat your clients. And then we'll talk about fibromyalgia itself. So what are the risk factors? How common is it? What are the symptoms? What's the typical medical management? How is it actually assessed? So how is it diagnosed? And then also, what are some tools that somebody can use to actually track the symptoms to see if they're improving, little by little over time. Then we'll talk about the nutritional therapy for fibromyalgia, supplements for fibromyalgia, and then again, like I said, other therapies that patients should definitely be aware that they should take advantage of, because it takes a village when it comes to chronic pain conditions. And then we'll field everybody's questions. So I'd like to actually start everybody off with a video about pain, because this kind of explains it better than I can. And then we'll talk about the contents a little bit more detail, but I'll let Laura Mosley take it from here.
Once upon a time, all the lands were fraught with persistent pain. So widespread was this affliction that 1 in 4 people experienced it. The pain lasted for more than 3 months. It shadowed their daily lives, held them back from everyday activities, and the interventions they tried proved useless. Hey, pain, go away, we've tried it all, but still you stay. Moving less, taking pills, knives and needles, and still we're sore. We can't take no more. But the pain remains like a loyal companion. The people's hopes faded, and they became resigned to living with the pain. Only now the pain was a beast. Then Along came a group of researchers, of which I am one. Back off, big fella. I'm Professor Lorimer Mosley, and I'm a pain scientist. Pain scientists are starting to think differently about pain and its causes, and we're making exciting discoveries, like how the way you think about your pain can change the way it feels. Over the next few minutes, I'll help you to understand your pain. Understanding is important because it can change how much things hurt and how much your body can do, and it can help you to tame the beast. First, trust me about this. Pain is not an accurate measure of tissue health. Pain is a protector. By making unpleasant feelings, your brain changes your behaviour so you can avoid injury or your tissues can heal. Sometimes pain is not helpful, like phantom limb pain. You don't expect a missing limb to ache, but it does, and the pain is very real. So how do we explain this? Well, pain is a warning signal from your brain that depends on credible evidence to say your body needs protecting. But sometimes pain's too protective and you get unnecessary warning signals. Pain scientists now understand that there are many ways our nervous system ends up producing unnecessary warning signals. Take conditioning, for example. You think of Pavlov's dog. Every time food was offered, Pavlov rang a bell. Of course, the dog would salivate seeing the food. This went on for a while. Eventually, the dog was conditioned to salivate for the bell alone. Conditioning is just one of the ways your body learns pain. And the longer your nervous system produces pain, the better it gets at producing it. Your body learns pain. So what feeds this beast? Well, let's look at how pain works. In your body's tissues, there are specific neurons which normally only respond to harmful stimuli, whether mechanical, chemical, or thermal. When they are activated, they send a warning signal to your spinal cord, which can in turn send a signal to your brain. This activity in neurons is called nociception, and it's happening all the time, but only sometimes results in pain. Most of the time, the brain protects you with other things, like movement. Once the warning signal reaches the brain makes sense of it based on the information arriving and a vast amount of information already stored. If there's good reason to think protection is required, then your brain makes pain. One of our amazing discoveries is that you can have pain without any physical stimuli. Thoughts and places might activate the warning signals, and the pain feels exactly the same. It's not just the brain. Your spinal cord also learns how to generate unnecessary warning signals. So how do you know when your nervous system is learning pain? You may notice your pain spreads or comes on without warning. Your body feels odd and it's hard to move properly. Your pain changes quickly with your mood and small annoyances can set it off. Old injuries start to hurt again. You're more sensitive to stimuli, and the longer the pain goes on, the more all of this occurs. The old way we understood pain could not explain these things and left many sufferers feeling like no one believed it was real, or for it to hurt so badly, there must be a major tissue problem. But we now know how persistent pain happens. So how can you tame the beast? Pain is a very personal thing. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. And while you probably have well thought out coping strategies, it's time to take a new approach to dealing with and reducing your pain, one that focuses on retraining your pain system. This might mean testing yourself physically and moving more than you normally would. Being honest about your current attitudes and beliefs can also help, as can asking your health professional new questions.
How do I know if my pain system is being overprotective?
How do I retrain my pain system to be less protective?
How do I know if I'm safe to move?
So be brave and have hope, because it is possible to tame the beast. Visit our website for more information and questions to ask your health professional. tamethebeast.org.
Okay, so I'm hoping that was a kind of a breath of fresh air for a lot of people, or at least that it introduced some new ideas. Because yeah, this traditional model where pain is, I'm injured, my body is telling my brain, or my body's telling me essentially that I'm injured, and that the degree of my injury equals the degree of my pain. We know that that's simply not true. Like pain is fundamentally an alarm, and it depends on the idea that, yeah, your body is under threat somehow. And of course, this threat recognition system, as it were, and this protection system becomes overprotective with chronic pain. And there are a couple of different ways that this can happen. So we do know, okay, number one, though, that pain is created in the brain. That does not mean that it is not real. So that's the number one thing that I want to impress upon everybody, is that it's a very real experience. I mean, everything that we feel, all of our emotions, we don't question whether they're real or not. They are, of course, products of our brain. Our thoughts are products of our brain. things that we see and touch. We can only experience these things because our brain basically interprets, our senses as meaning that, okay, there's a mouse in front of me because I can see it and I can feel it. It's still actually there, even though this is a product of my brain. So that's a big thing, is that it's a real experience and it's not intentional. The pain system is mostly unconscious. So the pain that's created in the brain depends on the interaction of about 9 different parts of the brain that essentially get information from the body. And this information is that nociception. And nociception is threat. It's some level of threat, but it doesn't have to be injury. So the brain will get these signals, and then essentially it's like it's getting together and it's reading a report. And based on how it reads that report, it will decide whether or not pain would be protective. And I can give a really good example of how nociception is not, kind of jumped ahead there. I can give a very good example of how nociception is not the same as actual injury. And this is something that you guys can all do at home. So if you take your hand and you push your finger back, if you push it back far enough, you can get to the point where it starts to hurt right here, and usually on the back of the knuckle too. Now, I didn't actually injure myself. The minute I stopped doing that, it stopped hurting again. What I'm doing is I'm introducing threat to this part of my finger, because if I keep pushing it back far enough, I could tear it. I'm going in the direction where I could do damage to my body. But at this point, there's no actual damage. I'm just stretching. at this point, but it hurts nonetheless. So I have activated my pain system by threatening it. Now, normally, people will have essentially a spam filter in their spinal cord for the most part. So that's what he was talking about when he mentioned that the spinal cord learns to generate unnecessary signals, is that the spinal cord acts as a spam filter. So it would say that's just stretch. We're not on the way to actually hurting ourselves in some way. But in chronic pain, this stops happening. So your spam filter breaks, and normal movements become potentially painful. They become painful because this normal amount of stretch, this normal amount of movement is now being taken seriously as risky, whereas it's not. And there are other examples too. So this is a really interesting one. This is a case study of a worker who had stepped on a nail that actually ended up going between his toes like that, and went from the bottom of the shoe out into the top of it. And he actually needed morphine. He was taken, without taking the boot off, he was taken directly to the emergency room. He needed morphine to remove the boot. He experienced terrible, terrible pain. That was visual, essentially, threat. So you can have the threat coming, directly from movements, but you can also have it coming from visual inputs. You can see that your body is in danger, and in some cases, not in every case and not with everyone. In some cases, just seeing the potential threat is enough for the brain to generate pain as protection. So nociception comes in basically 3 sources, and this is what our brain sort of bases pain off of, is these threat reports based on either mechanical threat, so that's movement, that could potentially could potentially cause an injury. So some form of stretch, some form of impact, weight bearing, like walking on a foot, for example, that's sore, walking an ankle that's sore. Temperature, so when it's either too hot or too cold, because you can either burn yourself or you can get frostbite. And chemical nociception. So with chemical nociception, that is where we're really concerned with what essentially the influence of nutrition is, because that's where most of the contribution to diet comes from. And all nociception is going to go from wherever it's happening in the body. It's got to go into the spine first, and then it's going to go up the spine into the brain. And the spine can increase the sensitivity of those signals. And then you get something called central sensitization. So if people are basically moving normally, they have normal amounts of nociception. So because we're always producing it, we're always potentially under threat, but something happens. Something happens to tip the balance, so that now the nervous system starts to change, that it starts to interpret unthreatening things as being threatening and requiring pain for protection. You can get something called central sensitization, which is where normal signals can basically get transferred into threat. And this happens, at the level of the nerves, where they simply become more sensitized, meaning that it takes less of anything to produce tons and tons and tons more threat signals. So you can kind of see this is a normally functioning synaptic end bulb that is, this is where the transfer of a nervous signal happens. So nerves they're not directly connected to each other. They basically do a baton pass kind of a thing, and it would be like adding a whole bunch of more people that they don't just take the baton that's being passed to them. They have like a box full of their own batons, and every time they get one baton, they send 10 up, and that's an actual physiological change in how the nerves work, and we can see that. And I like this illustration that you can see like there are so many more receptors, and just the bulb is so much busier. And then this one, which I was hoping would be a little bit clearer, but this one's talking about, so there are nociceptors coming in from here, so like an actual nerve carrying threat messages from the body, and then there are non-nociceptive fibers. So those are ones that are carrying information just about touch, for example, touch, temperature, stuff that should just feel like soft, hard, or like warm, cool, cold, hot, and they synapse here in the spinal cord as well. When you have central sensitization, this normally it's not even carried by the same nerves, but they meet in the spinal cord. So you have threat reports meeting at one spot in the spinal cord, and then you have regular sensation, how things feel meeting at another place. They basically do a lane merge, so that now the normal sensation is a lane merging with threat. So then you can literally have pain all the time. In this case, it's being fed by just everything, by every sensation. And there are ways to assess these central syndromes. So a lot of these things that I'm showing you with the changes in the spinal cord, the changes in how the nerves work, that's not something that would be done on an individual basis. These are laboratory experiments where they've figured out that this is how the system works, but it's not easy to test every single person to see what's the degree of this. But we do have a couple of other ways of assessing it, and a lot of them have to do with questionnaires that are going to ask about the prevalence of symptoms that also come with central sensitization. This one is called the Central Sensitization Index, and it's rated. So if you answer never, it's a 0. Rarely it's a 1. Sometimes it's a 2. Often is a 3. Always is a 4. And all of the questions here are things that people can experience when they're centrally sensitized. So feeling tired and unrefreshed even when waking from enough sleep, having stiff, achy feeling muscles, having anxiety attacks, clenching and gritching the teeth, and then problems with bowel, so diarrhea or constipation, needing help performing daily activities, sensitivity to bright lights, just very, very like high levels of fatigue, pain, of course, headaches, discomfort with urination, sleep problems, difficulty concentrating, skin problems, stress makes my physical symptoms worse, depression, low energy, tension in the neck and shoulders, especially pain in the jaw, certain smells making you feel dizzy and nauseated, the need to urinate frequently, legs feel restless, difficulty remembering things, suffered trauma as a child, pain in the pelvic area. So these are all symptoms that are part and parcel with central sensitization. And then, of course, there are known syndromes. So restless leg syndrome, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, which we're talking about today, TMJ disorder, so pain in the jaw, constant migraine or tension headaches. Of course, having them every once in a while is normal, but where they're a regular occurrence, IBS, multiple chemical sensitivities, neck injury, so whiplash, anxiety or panic attacks and depression. This will just ask about them, but for this particular questionnaire, which I recommend, it's kind of fun to just do it yourself, especially if you have any history of chronic pain, is that anything basically over 30 is considered to be clinical. So that means that your nervous system is sensitized enough that some of your symptoms that are being described there are due to these changes in the nervous system and not necessarily due to an injury, not necessarily due to due to any other thing. Then we don't know how much this score has to change in order for it to make a difference. But definitely, if you went from being like above 30 to lower than 30, that would be very, very significant. And we do know too that because this indicates that the nervous system has changed really centrally, like in the spinal cord, in the brain, and that it's changed in the way it works. Like it's not broken in the way that, for example, a car that can drive, but it only goes in reverse. It's not broken because it still moves. It's just not functioning the way that it should. It's the same thing here. And because the nervous system isn't functioning the way that it should, a lot of medical interventions that just focus on the body, like surgeries, for example, have been shown to not affect central sensitivity. So osteoarthritis, it actually has a large component of the pain of osteoarthritis. Like the damage to the cartilage is real, but the pain, it can be super variable. And when people have a lot of pain, they're usually centrally sensitized to some degree, and surgery doesn't affect this. So having the knee replaced where you don't have any cartilage damage at all anymore, that can not make a lick of difference to the pain. And so we know that as long as people still have a high score with this questionnaire, that they don't have a very good quality of life, regardless of like other interventions that they might have received. Okay, so this is our general overview of pain itself. So that's pain. Pain is real. It's a real experience, but the injury or whatever is going on is usually smaller than the pain. So always think of pain, especially when it is excessive, when it's ongoing, as it is in fibromyalgia, and when it has triggers that just don't make any sense. They're out disproportionate to the amount of pain that people have. The pain is much larger than the injury. So when it comes to fibromyalgia, it does affect about 1 to 8% of the world population. So every area here is over 2%. North America, well, the United States especially has the largest proportion. Europe as well, especially Italy, has I think about 3%. And we know that the biggest risk factors, because it involves changes in the nervous system, is stress or traumatic event exposure. And how this seems to come in, and this is true for all chronic pain, is that pain is a protector. If you've experienced trauma or a traumatic event, you were not protected at a very, very important point in time. And therefore, your nervous system essentially changes and pain evolves to be your protector instead of whatever else should have protected you from that event. Car accidents are a known, especially for fibromyalgia. Car accidents are a very common trigger for fibro. Body composition, so a body mass index over 25. The vast majority of people with fibromyalgia are overweight or obese. And this has a lot to do with increasing that chemical nociception that we talked about. So chemicals are sort of the inflammatory chemicals that the immune system produces. They feed the pain system. And when you are carrying more fat than your body is essentially designed to deal with, you have increased levels of inflammation. So fat itself produces inflammation, and therefore people who are overweight tend to have higher pain levels and depression as well. Genetics. Now, genetics, by this, I don't mean that people are more likely to have it if their relatives have it. That hasn't been definitively demonstrated, but we know that there are certain genes that are defective in fibromyalgia, and they're ones that actually have to do with our body's spam filter. So one way that the body stops excessive threat reports from ever reaching the brain and being essentially reinterpreted as requiring pain is your body produces opioids. Your body produces enkephalins and endorphins, which I'm sure you've heard of. These are our happy drugs. People produce them when they're exercising, for example. In fibromyalgia, so the opioids are basically supposed to stop the reports at the level of the spinal cord, so they don't bother the brain. They don't bother the boss. We don't knock on the boss's door essentially for that. They don't work in fibromyalgia. In fact, people with fibromyalgia seem to produce more of them, but the receptors where the opioid is actually supposed to go and act on the nerve and stop that excess danger report from going up, they don't respond to it. That is a genetic issue. They've identified two specific sets of genes that are altered in fibromyalgia that control this. A big one, though, is changes in the gut microbiome. There are a lot less bifidobacteria and eubacterium in the guts of people with fibromyalgia. This family of bacteria, they metabolize neurotransmitters in the gut. So I don't know if everybody's heard that 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut. And of course, serotonin connects with depression. It's one of our happy drugs. So basically, they don't have the bacteria that produce and that regulate serotonin in the gut, and that is a huge that increases pain and increases the likelihood of anxiety and depression. Far more common in women, and that has something to do with progesterone activity. So progesterone tends to be dysregulated. It also affects the thyroid when progesterone is highly unregulated, and this is one other reason why it could be more prevalent in women. And then in terms of age, people are more likely to get it when they're older, but it almost always starts before the age of 50. So it's common to get it between 20 and 50. So the symptoms generally are all over the place. So widespread pain, of course. Hyperalgesia means that things that hurt more than they need to. So this is like a pain response to something that that may or not, it shouldn't be painful. And even if it's where pain could be expected, like for example, pushing on a bone. Like if you just push on a bone, you can usually get it to the point where it's kind of hurts. But it hurts much more than somebody else pushing with the exact same amount of pressure on the exact same spot. And allodynia describes where you get pain with stuff that shouldn't be painful. So the most common one is cold allodynia. So when you put cold on you, ice, for example, it should just feel cold. But instead it hurts. And it's extremely common for people with fibromyalgia and other pain syndromes to have worse pain by colder weather because of this. Their body, your temperature sensors are just picking up cold, but instead of telling your brain it feels cold. The cold is basically jumping into the threat report lane. It's going to the pain system instead of going into the normal sensation system. So that is what people will notice. Fatigue. So in about 70% of people with fibromyalgia, they're heavily fatigued. So they tend to oversleep quite a bit. Insomnia is a little bit less common. They tend to oversleep, but they are not rested. Cognitive issues. So difficulties with memorizing things, concentrating, migraines as well on a daily basis, and low quality of life and lowered ability to live independently. So a lot of people with fibro require help for doing, shopping, like just regular everyday sorts of stuff. And it's quite significant. Like the reduction in quality of life is comparable to chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. And this is where you cannot breathe to the point where, people that you have to walk around with oxygen all the time. You get breathless like washing the dishes. It's a significantly lowered quality of life, and you can have fibro is that impactful that it really compares to this. And then the two things that really come with it again is major depression. So 62 to 80% of people with fibromyalgia have major depression, and IBS because of that microbiome connection. Definitely at least 27% of people have it diagnosed. And if a person has bowel pain, has gut pain, and they have some of these other symptoms, that gut pain is the number one predictor that they're going to get diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So the microbiome is absolutely key. So in terms of medical management, there aren't actually a whole lot of medications that are prescribed for this, approved medications that are prescribed for this. So the things that are normally prescribed, things like anti-epileptic drugs, antidepressants, various types of antidepressants, muscle relaxants. This is a serotonin receptor antagonist, dopogenic. So they're all attempting to modulate the nervous system in some way, especially modulate the processing of nociception from the body. Like all of anything that's working on the brain, any anti-epileptic, any antidepressant, you're essentially working on the processing part now, so that you're not doing anything with what's coming in from the body. You're trying to say, okay, brain, whatever you're getting, just interpret it differently. Not very many of these meds are even approved for fibromyalgia. Actually, in Health Canada, has approved only 2. So these are nerve modulating medications, and in the EU, there are no approved medications for fibromyalgia. Cannabis might help with pain and sleep, but not the depression. And interestingly enough, testosterone might help. Testosterone tends to make nerves less sensitive to stimuli. And that's another reason why pain is more common in women, just flat out. Actually, there's every single pain that you can think of: shoulder pain, back pain, all of the pain syndromes. They're all more common in women, probably for this reason, that testosterone has a bit of a protective effect against nervous system hypersensitivity. And we definitely know that opioids do not work, because we just talked about how people with fibromyalgia overproduce opioids. It's just that their system is insensitive to them. Their system doesn't actually respond to those opioids properly. And then as far as how it's assessed, we have got, of course, the central sensitivity index that we talked about. So that's one way of assessing it. That's one way of assessing all chronic pain conditions, actually. There are no lab markers. You need to sort of rely on symptoms and questionnaires. And there's another really good questionnaire called the Fibromyalgia Survey Questionnaire. And it's kind of a combination of 2 of these. And as you can see, you've got different areas of the body where you could have pain or tenderness. And somebody is going to check the areas where they've had pain or tenderness in the past week. And you do need to have at least 7 of these areas checked off. And then you also have to rate the severity of your symptoms. And again, it's always during the past 7 days, especially with fatigue, trouble thinking or remembering, waking up tired and unrefreshed. And again, you're scoring that from no problem, slight problem, moderate problem, severe problem. And also if you've had any pain in the lower abdomen. So again, typical symptoms of IBS, depression or headache, yes or no. And you have to have at least 5 points on that. And the symptoms have to be there for at least 3 months, but there's no other diagnostic criteria. They used to have like certain numbers of trigger points only in specific places, but now it's just overall anywhere. And remember how I mentioned that one thing that becomes hypersensitized in most people with chronic pain is their response to cold. That's another key one. And there have been some studies where they looked at basically how much of an area of the leg you can induce pain in just by putting an ice cube there. So if somebody puts, for example, like an ice cube here, and the leg hurts all the way up there from having ice on it, that's another pretty significant sign of central sensitivity. Can also be a sign of Raynaud's, which is where your veins sort of spasm in response to cold. But people usually know if they had that. So that's where your fingertips go white. If you're out in the winter, even for a few minutes without gloves and such. But if that's not the case, and somebody responds to cold in that way, then that's a really, really, really clear sign that they're centrally sensitized. And the other big thing about fibro is that it is a diagnosis of exclusion, because a lot of these symptoms are symptoms also of inflammatory and autoimmune disorders. So, of course, there are lab markers for all of these. So anybody who has arrived at a diagnosis of fibromyalgia should have been really well assessed to make sure that they don't have like rheumatoid arthritis, that they don't have lupus, that they don't have some kind of other autoimmune disease where there is lots of inflammation going on, that they don't have another type of like an endocrine, or they don't have hypothyroidism, they don't have other type of muscular dystrophy, that they don't have a neuropathy, they don't have multiple sclerosis, and that they don't have another pain syndrome. So these all have to be excluded, and then plus the results of this fibromyalgia survey questionnaire in order to say, okay, they've got fibromyalgia. Interestingly enough, though, rheumatoid arthritis comes after fibro in a shockingly large number of cases. So it's not like when I say there's no lab markers, and this is kind of the big thing, there's no lab markers, there's no super obvious inflammation, like the kind of inflammation that comes with an autoimmune disease where your body, your immune system is throwing up so much inflammation attacking yourself that it shows up. It shows up obviously in the blood. Despite that, though, microinflammation is a huge part of this. It's just it's difficult to measure because it's below the thresholds of what most blood tests are actually looking for. But the fact that after a long history of fibromyalgia, you're more likely to get rheumatoid arthritis, that kind of speaks to the fact that there are actually inflammatory processes going on. There are immune processes going on. They just aren't going on at a level where it's easy to measure them. And then we also like to use something called the pain catastrophizing scale. The pain catastrophizing scale is about our thoughts about pain, because that spam filter that we talked about, so it's controlled by some certain genes. It's genetically dependent, but at the same time, our thoughts don't occur in clouds above our heads. They don't have no influence on how our nervous system functions, and how we think actually physically, chemically changes the nervous system. And we know that high degrees of catastrophizing actually increase pain by breaking that spam filter. It decreases the sensitivity of our opioid receptors, our body's own opioid receptors, to our own natural opioids, which are really powerful painkillers, and also decreases the amount that we even produce just by thinking, catastrophically. And so this is actually a really, really good one to do. And as a matter of fact, I would kind of like to encourage anybody who's in the audience to actually rate this one right now. So you would give it a 0 if this doesn't apply to you at all, a 1 if it's to a slight degree, a 2 if it's to a moderate degree, a 3 to a great degree, and 4 all the time. How much you agree with these statements. So I'll leave it on here for just a second. And if anybody wants to actually do this, that would be kind of amazing. So if anybody wants to do this, give yourself a score and then share with me what that score is in the chat. Then we can talk about that afterwards. But it's suffice to say, a score of, again, over 30 indicates a clinically significant amount of catastrophizing, which basically means that your thoughts are catastrophic enough about what pain means that is changing the way your nervous system functions. It's actually, enhancing the pain. It's not neutral. So I will actually just move on at this point, but we will go back to this at the end if anybody else wants to do it. And of course, feel free to take a screenshot and then do it while we're talking about some of the other topics. Okay, so now we're coming to diet. So there's a lot here because, of course, we talked about how probiotics, the composition of the microbiome, is hugely important with fibromyalgia, because basically the microbiome controls how our nervous system and how our immune system develops, how they develop together, and how sensitive they are to stimuli. Your vagus nerve, for example, directly connects your brainstem, where a lot of your really base emotions are regulated, including pain. The hypothalamus is sort of the seat of all of our deep automatic emotions, and a lot of really strong ones too, seat of anxiety, depression, for example. And it is, that's very close to where the vagus nerve comes out. The vagus nerve innervates the entire gut. And we know that probiotics can activate the vagus nerve and calm the hypothalamus down. So when the hypothalamus is dysregulated, when it is overactive, it tends to produce anxiety and depression. And so the microbiome has a huge effect on that. And also just in actually training the immune system to throw up inflammation or not. So those are the two big things, is you're either influencing the overall sensitivity and activity of the brain and nervous system, or you're controlling the amount of inflammation that the immune system is producing. And that inflammation is food for pain. So the inflammation provides threat reports. And generally speaking, the more threat reports your brain has to deal with, the more likely it is to turn a bunch of them into pain. So we have a couple of options for diets that have been proven to decrease fibromyalgia pain. And almost all of them work on basically changing the microbiome in some way. So a low FODMAP diet. So FODMAP is these are fermentable carbohydrates. So it is gluten-free, because a lot of the basically the other starches in wheat. So never mind the GLAD, never mind the proteins. The starches in wheat are highly fermentable, and highly fermentable starches tend to preferentially feed negative bacteria. So the bacteria that are more likely again to throw up inflammation. And this one produced effects on fibromyalgia after only 4 weeks. So it's an easy bar to enter at, is the low FODMAP diet. The only thing I would say that is difficult about the FODMAP diet is that it's not intuitive. You can't just sort of be like, okay, I don't eat all of this and I don't eat all of this criteria of food and then I'm good. You need to actually look up every food that you want to eat and make sure that it doesn't have fermentable carbohydrates in it. Thankfully, there are apps for this. So if you even just go on to an app store, I think the best one is the Monash app for low FODMAP, and it will tell you. So you can just add the foods that you're eating. and it will basically say, okay, this is your FODMAP score for the day. You want to keep it under this amount, and it'll give you a color-coded guide of green foods, which are totally okay in any quantity, yellow foods which you can have small amounts of but not very much, and red foods that you absolutely have to avoid. And the effect of FODMAP though is that it changes the composition of the microbiome. So you're preferentially attempting to feed the healthy ones. More so, though, you're attempting to preferentially starve the ones that are more likely to worsen the symptoms. And then on that note as well, gluten-free, just flat out gluten-free without any other modifications has also been tried, and it also did prove to reduce pain, improve like depression scores, but it had to be followed for a much longer period of time, so an entire year. FODMAP is naturally gluten-free, and a bunch of these diets you'll notice are very, very low gluten, or they're gluten-free entirely, because when people have basically IBS-like symptoms, they almost always have leaky gut and allergies. And those allergies, the most common things to have allergies to are the things that are most difficult to digest, so gluten and, of course, dairy, but specifically lactose. Fermented dairy seems to be okay. Raw vegan diets. So again, we've also got something in here that is going to be really, really low. Oh God, sorry, brain skipped a minute. It's going to not have a lot of inflammatory potential to it, and it's also going to be gluten-free, of course, because gluten needs to be cooked. 12 weeks for that. The other thing, very, very good about the raw food vegan diet is just that plus antioxidants, because, and we'll get into this when we actually talk about the supplements involved, is that when your nervous system and your immune system are throwing up a lot of just low-grade constant inflammation, that's free radical generating. Free radicals damage our cells and they hypersensitize our nerves. So you need antioxidants to essentially soak up that damage. So they're shields. Any type of diet that is that helps these types of conditions is usually going to do one of two things or both of them. It's either going to decrease free radical production or increase antioxidant protection, or both. And a raw vegan diet basically does both. Seems to take a little bit longer than FODMAP though, because a lot of raw vegan food does contain lots of fermentables, which again can preferentially feed some of the bacteria that are overgrown that you're trying to decrease their numbers of. Also though, just MSG and aspartame-free diet has also been proven to work. MSG and aspartame both contain amino acids that your brain will metabolize into neurostimulants, so things that dial up the activity of the brain and central nervous system, which actually you don't want in centralized pain. The brain is over responsive to things. It's hypersensitive. And even 4 weeks on an MSG-free aspartame diet decreased all parameters. Mediterranean diet as well helps quite a bit. They only allow olive oil and then relatively small portions of grains and animal products. And these all decrease inflammation as well, because of course they don't you don't produce as many inflammatory particles when you have a low omega-6 diet. Omega-6 is what gives us all of our systemic inflammation, all of our prostaglandins. And then also just a hypocaloric diet. A couple of reasons for that: people lost weight. So stored fat produces its own inflammation. So losing weight does help. And then also just eating less in general means your metabolism is going to produce less of its own inflammation. Our bodies are actually a huge source of inflammation. Like when we metabolize food, we produce toxins as a result of that. And so especially if our food isn't providing lots of antioxidants, the more we can sort of detoxify ourselves and increase our own body's like inflammatory potential. But at the same time, 5 to 6 months. So this is a high bar. So if I had to recommend anything to start people off on their sort of their nutritional healing journey with fibro, I would definitely recommend at least like the low FODMAP, which is naturally gluten-free, and is fairly easy to manage once you have got the app and you can tell, what foods are low FODMAP and which ones aren't. Because we just sort of talked about that pain in the microbiome. The microbiome itself generates metabolites that sensitize nociceptors and that increase neuroinflammation as well. And IBS is a central pain syndrome as well. And you can sort of see here, so we have, of course, our gut microbiota. They are responsible for producing a lot of neurotransmitters, which of course affect how the brain functions. They will either activate or deactivate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve goes back, regulates the integrity of the gut barrier. And of course, cortisol and adrenaline also have the effect of modulating how the gut microbiota affect the immune cells. So it's a very complicated system, but just remember that the gut basically controls the brain. It's a two-way street, but we have 10 times more bacterial cells in our gut than we have actual cells in our body. And we also get genes. We get genes from our gut microbiota, which actually could explain why there's some of these gene defects in people who are susceptible to chronic pain syndromes, because it seems to be that the gut microbiome and alterations to the gut microbiome are the first thing that happens. And then people maybe don't develop don't have the genes that they need in order to develop the nervous system in a way so that it doesn't make chronic pain. So that is a theory that's out there. And they have actually because of that, we have studied probiotics in pain specifically. And we do know that especially Lactobacillus acidophilus, so these are just a couple of the unique strains, and Reuteri, that they lower abdominal pain. VSL number 3 is a really high potency, that's a mixed species. It's a mixed species probiotic, and it also decreased hypersensitivity inflammation, really works quite well for ulcerative colitis. Bifidobacterium, also all lower abdominal pain in children, and other types of mixed species probiotics with a mixture of Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus, they decrease migraine pain and frequency. And we really have to pay attention to just looking at, if you have a typical Western diet pattern that's low in fruits and vegetables, low in prebiotic fibers, low in probiotics or fermented foods, low in vitamin D, that you just end up with more E. coli bacteria, like more of these bacteria that damage the lining of the intestine, and that also encourage the production of inflammation by immune cells, lining the area as well. Whereas when it's high in fruits and vegetables, high in probiotic fibers, you have a better diversity, and you have a lot less E. coli and a lot more of the types of bacteria that actually stimulate the dendritic cells. The dendritic cells are nerve cells that actually help decrease autoimmune reactions and decrease the amount of inflammation that the system throws up. So in terms of supplements that we can use, a couple of these come down to, again, optimizing nervous function and also antioxidant function. But vitamin D is huge. Vitamin D is huge for pretty well everything, but specifically, very high amounts of vitamin D could be used for fibro. They've done 50,000 weekly, which is, it's not quite 5,000 a day, it's about 25, or no, it's not quite 10,000 a day. It is, somebody do the math for me, sorry here, but they did that for 8 weeks, and they did 600,000 as an intramuscular injection, just to bring vitamin D status up. Vitamin D helps your immune system basically stop these sort of autoimmune reactions where you're throwing up this constant low level amounts of inflammation, even though there's nothing to fight. There's no enemy, and about 93 to 97% of Canadians are deficient in vitamin D. We don't get outside enough. We don't have enough exposure to UVB. So everybody should definitely be taking vitamin D, but especially people with fibromyalgia should be taking high levels of vitamin D and should probably have their vitamin D levels actually checked. And part of that is due to the parathyroid. The parathyroid helps activate vitamin D into its active sort of blood regulated form, and then it's actually the kidneys that turn it into its hormonal form, where it really works. But the parathyroid tends to be defective with fibromyalgia, hence why they probably need more than other people in order to get a sufficiently high level of vitamin D actually activated in the blood. Vitamin B1, thiamine, very high dosages for at least 20 days for fibro, like far more than you would find in your typical B supplement. So definitely worth trying. So 600 to 1800 milligrams for 20 days. B12 and folate. And these, again, maintain the integrity of the myelin sheath. They help nerves function properly. And we know when nerves are hypersensitive that they're overreactive and they tend to burn out, like they physically burn themselves out. They produce a lot of free radical damage just from not having these normal pauses in this normal level of activity and rest. And B12 injections tend to work best. Oral folate is absolutely fine. And again, antioxidants, vitamin C and vitamin E, not insane levels though, like reasonable levels that most people can easily supplement. Magnesium also decreases systemic inflammation, and it helps make serotonin. So that comes in with the depression piece. Ribose is a molecular sugar that helps increase your body's ability to just produce energy. And it also at 5 grams a day has been shown to decrease all parameters. So to improve depression, improve energy levels, improve sleep, decrease pain with fibromyalgia. 5-HTP does the same. This is another one that's looking to increase serotonin production, and probiotics. And they looked at really need about 25 billion CFU. Mixed is fine, but it should include lactobacillus GG. That's a lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. And again, also improves pretty well all parameters. Other things that people need to work on though, because pain is complex. It's not just about nutrition, it's about everything. You need to get people to move when they have chronic pain, because lack of movement basically reinforces, that movement is dangerous and painful. And of course, with people with fibromyalgia, they're not just in pain, they're unable to move. Aerobic exercise, and we need at least 150 minutes a week in at least 10-minute increments. And this can be anything that they are comfortable doing. So aquatic therapy for a lot of people who can't jog, can't run, is a really good bar to step into. And you need to coach people though that at least 8 weeks to see results, because the brain needs time to adjust, to adapt, to these changes. And aerobic exercise as well is absolutely essential for managing depression, to the point where if someone is not getting at least this much exercise a week, you can't say that that's not the reason they're depressed. And I'm talking about not just people with fibro, but everybody. If people have mood issues, problems with stress management, the number one thing, besides just, what are you eating? Are you drinking enough water? Do you have social contacts? All of these, basic stuff is though, how much are you moving? Because movement is a fundamental requirement. We don't have a body for nothing. It's not just there to haul our brain around while we move from point A to point B. Our bodies need to move. It's just like breathing, food, water, movement. You need to move a certain amount, and if you don't move enough, that causes illnesses. So it's not like exercise would be nice. It's fundamental. It's at the bottom of the pyramid. Qigong also helps by increasing the mind-body connection, helping with managing stress, reducing stress hormone levels. Same with massage. And they did know that you needed to do it weekly, like once a week for about 5 weeks. Helps mostly with stress reduction. So it's not that, oh, my muscles, are tight and therefore my muscles need to be softened or anything like that. It's more about the stress reduction piece of massage and the fact that it strengthens the mind-body connection. And then because anxiety, depression, coping strategies with pain are often part of the problem, actually. This cognitive behavioral therapy is also essential. So this is a type of talk therapy that helps people reframe their thinking, like help them identify some catastrophic thoughts and try to change them into something a little bit less catastrophic, to something easier to work with, and thoughts that are kinder to you, and that, of course, don't make your pain system generate more unnecessary pain. And part of that, of course, is also just self-education classes to help build self-efficacy, build this idea that, if you do these things, that you actually can affect your health, because a sense of helplessness is really, really common in people with fibromyalgia and people with chronic pain in general, that nothing they do makes any difference. And that needs to be changed. that thought pattern needs help. It needs strategies in order to change, but it also needs to change in order for pain to actually get better. Okay, everybody. So that is the bulk of my presentation here. So I'm just going to stop sharing, and then we have time for some questions.
Thanks for that, Vanessa. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
That was really informative. I learned a few things in there for sure. It's funny, you mentioned the Qigong. I just started doing that every morning, like for the last 2 weeks, and it's very impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, so if you have any questions for Vanessa, you can put them in the Q&A function at the bottom there, and we'll try and get to as many as we can.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, Vanessa.
Oh, no problem. So I am just reading a couple here. So Annette, thank you. So you mentioned your scores were all 0 for pain catastrophizing. That's fantastic. Okay, so I any of these, like, if any, sorry, I'm having one of those moments. I was going to say these resources. So you can always look up these on Google and actually get yourself a copy of the questionnaire, and they're really good resources just to have in the clinic. And Annette, I see you also have a question about fermentable carbs being the same as fermentable foods. So yeah, according to FODMAP, they actually do recommend avoiding sauerkraut. Now there are other diets. So we mentioned like the raw food vegan diet, for example, that of course would include things like sauerkraut, and that the principle with that one is a little bit different. So FODMAP works, but FODMAP is definitely instead of feed your friends, it's more kill your enemies. Whereas there are other diets for changing the microbiome that are a little bit more feed your friends than FODMAP is. Like the IBD-aid diet for inflammatory bowel disease, it hasn't been tested on people with fibromyalgia as far as I know, but it theoretically should work too. And they completely allow fermented foods like sauerkraut. So we're just kind of going with like what we know. So I'm just reporting on what people have actually tried. Yeah, but FODMAP does say no to sauerkraut, unfortunately. So Andrea, thank you. Excellent material. Would you be able to talk about repeat probiotics, relaxing the hypothalamus? Did I get this right? Yes. So probiotics, specifically like our healthy bowel bacteria, they activate the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve enters the brainstem just below the hypothalamus. When it's activated, it basically calms the nervous system down. Like you have two sort of modes that your nervous system operates in. It operates in sympathetic, which is fight or flight, and it operates in parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. The vagus nerve activates in parasympathetic rest and digest mode, and pain operates in sympathetic fight or flight mode. So the more you can get your nervous system to be in like in this more natural, like rhythm with being, active when it needs to be, but then not active when it needs to not be, the more pain, like basically the less intense pain gets. So yeah, that is something that just will normally happen when you have a healthy microbiome. When you don't have a healthy microbiome, the vagus nerve is understimulated, and therefore the nervous system tends to be more in fight or flight mode, more in pain producing mode, and also out of sleep mode. Sleep mode, of course, is also parasympathetic, which is why sleep and pain are so opposite to each other. And then pain causes sleep problems, lack of sleep causes pain problems, and exactly. So I hope that answered your question. Let me know if it didn't. Let me know if you need to know anything else. So Balvinder, thank you. I'm so glad. May we have a copy of this presentation, please, please, please. I don't know, Jason, you'll have to answer that question. I don't know if everybody's allowed to have a copy of the presentation or not. I know it's recorded, so you can see it again, but maybe
it's
Jason
recorded, so that'll be live on YouTube, so you can, in about a week, so you can go back and watch it as many times as you'd like or need to. And before we get to the next question, I just want to jump in and let everyone know that Vanessa will be hosting a Con Ed nutritional therapy and chronic pain that starts June 7th, and that's going to be for 7 Mondays. And so that'll cover a lot more of some of what was talked about tonight. It's a live and online certificate course. So, if you're a practitioner who works with a lot of chronic pain or feel that, more information in this area would benefit you, I'm sure it would really help you in your practice. So you can go register on the website, or you can reach out to Colleen at instituteofholisticnutrition.com and kind of get more info and all the details.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that. Because I started that, and we'll basically talk about the research behind supplementation, diet, and the details, the know-it-all, pretty well for all common chronic pain disorders. So, and we'll go into a lot more detail about the microbiome and how to influence it. So this is just a taste, but if you're finding this useful and you definitely want to know more, then I would love to see you in this course. It'll be the first time that I'm delivering it. I just made the curriculum up because I'm so passionate about this subject. So yeah, thank you. And so just looking at the rest of the questions. So Rachel, so yeah, I tried a lot of diagnosed with CRPS. Yeah, I have a lot of experience working with CRPS, and we do cover it in the course that I'm offering. So that'll be something we dive into a lot of detail about. Perfect. Okay, thank you. And then Balvinder has a question. Can we continue eating a gluten-free diet or vegan for the rest of life? Yeah, absolutely. There's no, the time frames that I put in there is what the research says in terms of the minimum amount of time that you need to do it in order to get some results. So that's it. Of course, you can stay on that diet for the rest of your life, but that's if somebody is resistant, for example, they're really not sure if they can do that, or if it'll be worthwhile, and they don't think that they can do it long term because they're not used to eating that way, for example, you can say, well, try it for 4 weeks because it should work in that amount of time, and then if it works, it's so much easier to adhere to it for a longer period of time. So can we have access to your contact info, please? Absolutely. So I've got thank you so much, and yeah, I think that's everything. And my contact info, I'm just going to put it in the chat information here. And of course, it's also, I have a page at the school. I'm on the faculty list, but here is my email. If you want to email me and let me know any other questions you have or any other comments. So using it for
a couple other questions that showed up in the Q&A box. So Andrea was asking if you could put up that last slide with the reference links again, just for a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just share my screen here.
And yes, there's a question in here about, can you take the pain course if you're not currently in nutrition school? Yes, just like I said, email Colleen or register online, and someone will contact you and kind of give you all the details to make sure that it is something that would make sense for you and fit. But absolutely.
Okay. Oh, so somebody mentioned here that they couldn't see. Oh, hang on. I think I need to change this to panelists and attendees. There we go. Okay. Can you see it now? So I've just reshared my email.
There we go. And then Vanessa, someone was asking, what would you recommend a specific diet for someone who has restless leg syndrome?
So restless leg syndrome is a centralized pain syndrome. So any diet, and as far as I've read, I've never read that it has been specifically targeted for nutritional therapy. But based on what we know about, especially the microbiome, the role of like microinflammation, there's a couple of diets that just keep coming up over and over and over again as ones that work for all sorts of different centralized pain syndromes, and it's universally either a like gluten-free Mediterranean diet or like something like a FODMAP diet. So it's always a diet that seeks to change how the microbiome is structured, and one that is high antioxidant and low allergen. So the IBD-AID diet is another one as well. So generally you're looking at like grain-free, very, very high in vegetables and fruits, but maybe like low in some of the fermentables. And then a lot of them will also, though, include things like yogurt, sauerkraut. Absolutely. A FODMAP is the only one, oddly enough, that doesn't include probiotic foods specifically. They just recommend that you just supplement with them. And like I said, it works, but I'm a bigger fan of the feed your friends approach. So.
Awesome. Well, that concludes our webinar for this evening. So thanks again, Vanessa, for everything. That was great. And for everyone that joined, thank you for being here. And if you have any questions about the Con Ed course, certainly reach out to us here at IHN or Vanessa. And we look forward to seeing you in the course.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. I look forward to seeing you as well. And thanks everybody for your time.